Welcome to Living Forward Radio, where our heartbeat at Spark of Life is to walk beside those who are grieving, those who have experienced devastated loss. Hello, everybody. I'm David Matthews. Along with my wife, Debbie, we founded the Spark of Life Foundation in 2009 after a personal loss. And we established this foundation called Spark of Life, where we do walk beside those who have experienced grief. We do that in many different ways. One of the ways we do that is grief recovery retreats at fabulous locations all over the nation. As of this date, in late July of 2020, we've done 106 3.5-day retreats, serving about 1,400 people. We also do grief recovery virtual retreats, online retreats that we're beginning in August 20th through 23rd, because of this COVID-19 pandemic that's hitting the world. So we're starting our virtual online retreats that we're excited about. We also do grief recovery coaching. We have grief certified coaches that really have experienced devastating loss, but they have worked their way through that with their pain, and they are living forward. Our coaches are well trained in order to help people who are experiencing loss. We also have a one-on-one course, a course that you can take individually online, and going through all the grief material that we do at our retreats and our workshops. We also do grief recovery workshops for businesses, churches, organizations, faith-based organizations all over the country. As of this date, we've done about 70 grief recovery workshops, serving about 7,000 people. And it's my pleasure to be your host. Our co-host is Rhonda Smith. Rhonda actually came to a Spark of Life retreat in 2019 after the loss of her husband, Mark. And Rhonda has her BS in business, in education. She also, her and her husband, Mark, founded an organization called Trails, in which they worked with juveniles who were experiencing troubled juveniles. And as Rhonda and I have talked before, anytime you see a teenager troubled, you can just mark it down that there's a lot of loss involved there. Welcome to the podcast, Rhonda. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, David. It's good to be here. I'm very happy about the podcast and being a part of it.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, isn't it, Rhonda, to be excited about grief work? When Debbie and I founded this, we had no idea that we were going to spend the rest of our lives dealing with those who've experienced devastating loss. And yet we have found it very exhilarating. For one reason, we see hope return to people. The mission of Spark of Life is to give hope to those who've experienced loss, that though life can never be the same after devastating loss, life can still be rich and fulfilling and even full of joy again. So I know you came to a retreat, and that's why you're one of our co-hosts here, because you have experienced hope again. Just how did your retreat experience go?
Well, I was very much looking forward to the retreat, just because I had so much anxiety about wanting to get help. I knew I was lost. I knew I was hurting. I knew I was in pits. I knew I was having trouble living forward, and I didn't know how to get there. And when I got there at the retreat, I don't know if you remember me saying, my one thing was I wanted to know I was going to be able to laugh again, to have joy again, to feel love again, to be loved again. And I was so looking for that. And I found it, and I'm continuing to find it. And so, the biggest thing I think that hit me there was how much loss, I had, loss not meaning death necessarily. Evidently, that was the reason I was there, for loss of my husband to cancer. But the losses that had been a part of my life prior to that, I had never dealt with, didn't even realize they were considered losses. Yeah. So, it was a big opening book of worms for me that needed to be opened and dealt with, so that I could move forward and have hope.
Well, this podcast is entitled Living Forward, and what you just said, Rhonda, was about living forward instead of existing forward. We had a retreat, one of our first retreats. It was in north of Dallas, and might have been our 10th retreat. And this man came to the retreat with his 20-something-year-old daughter. His story was that he and his wife had lost a son about 20 years earlier, and they didn't really deal with the loss very well. They stayed stuck in the pit. They turned on each other. They ended up divorcing which, by the way, is another huge loss, is divorce, another huge loss. So he had the loss of his marriage piled upon the loss of his son, still had another son and a daughter. And about a few years later, about a year before he came to the retreat in Texas, this man lost his second son, who died in a tragic accident. And now you have him losing his wife, losing two sons. He had a daughter left, and he came to the retreat. On the last day of the retreat, this man stood up before the group and said, David, I want to say something. We've been talking about living forward for 3 days. And when I came here, it finally hit me. I was existing forward. I was getting up in the morning and doing what I had to do, going to work, supporting my family, which is my daughter now. And then, but that was all. My life was not full of joy, and I was existing forward. And he turned to his daughter and he said, baby, I think it's time you and I start living forward. He was so fearful of living forward. And not only was he fearful of it, his daughter was, because she explained to us that, she was afraid to get in a car and drive the car or even be a passenger in a car, because she said, if something happened to me, my daddy would cease to exist. He would just kind of self-destruct. And I felt I had to play safe so I didn't get hurt again or hurt my dad. That was existing forward. So there's a huge difference between existing forward and living forward. Can you relate to that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, we all do the best we can when we first initially have those losses. And you do feel like you're just here. And then at some point, and especially for me, after I did Spark of Life, just a retreat on the weekend. And of course, then you have to actually put it to work. But at some point you realize, I need to live. I don't need to just exist. Existing is not good enough.
Yeah.
I can live. I will live. And your heart starts to open up and you start breathing again. And you're, instead of just getting out of bed and your feet hitting the ground, which takes every inkling of energy you have, for whatever reasons, to take care of your kids or work or whatever it is, you start learning how to live, how to smile, how to enjoy the day, how to enjoy the sunset, how to live. It takes some work, it takes a conscientious decision.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
And you found hope again, and our purpose is to give hope. So on these podcasts, I don't know what you're experiencing, you who are listening to this, obviously I don't know, but I do know you're listening because either you are experiencing deep loss or you know somebody who is experiencing that. And I'm just want to testify to this, that we know through working with thousands of grievers since 2009, and really many years before that in the profession I was in at that time. I have a counseling degree in substance abuse counseling, and did a whole lot of work with addicts for many years. And I know that at times the people that I worked with for years before we did this grief work specifically, many of them had given up hope to live forward. And then we started this work, Spark of Life, and we have just seen so many people who are devastated. Their stories are just horrific, and yet we see them have a semblance of hope by Sunday afternoon at a retreat. And in our grief workshops, we've talked to people on the phone, we talk to people through email, and it's just amazing that human beings have the capacity to overcome, not to get rid of your pain, not to act as if the loss never happened, but to live forward with the pain. We've had people come to our retreats that experienced a devastating loss 30 years ago, and they had been stuck in the pit of grief for 30 years. We've also had people come just a few weeks after devastating loss. We had a couple in Alaska 2 years ago. They lost their teenage daughter to suicide about 6 weeks before they came to the retreat. They actually thought they could never live forward with hope again. An amazing couple that in 3 days, no, their problems were not solved. They didn't eliminate their pain from losing their precious daughter. They had a lot of guilt they had to work through. They're still working through it. But they came out of that retreat with hope and a plan, a strategy to live forward and to choose to live forward. And it's amazing what a little bit of hope can do for you. And that's what this podcast is going to be all about. And this is our initial podcast when we want to give hope to those of you who are listening. So go to sparkoflife.org if you need help after this podcast. Many of you found it on our website, but you might have found it in other ways. So please go to sparkoflife.org and you'll see all the help that's available for you to live forward. And I guess the question, Rhonda, the big question is, why do some people who've experienced loss never get out of the pit of grief? They really don't live forward, that their life is basically over. They're existing forward, but not living with joy again. And why do some people who experience horrific loss get up and have hope again? I mean, that's the $1 million question, right?
Well, and I mean, I know it sounds real simple, and I certainly don't mean to diminish anybody's hurt or pain, because I know to some extent what people out there who are listening are going through. Of course, each individual is different. But one thing that I feel pretty confident in saying is, you use the word choice. I mean, and choice doesn't mean easy, but it is a choice. I've had people, and I think I mentioned this to you before, I had a lady that came up to me at church, and she meant well. And she said, honey, I just want you to know that, I know what you're going through, and it'll never get any better. And you'll always be in that pit. And I thought, bless her. I picked up her hand, kissed her, asked her to walk back across the room, come up back with something better next time. But, she had made a choice, whether she meant to or not. She had made a choice to be a miserable widow. And man, did she open my eyes. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live like that. So making the choice leads to the hope, and everybody wants hope. And we kind of use that term hope loosely these days. You see it on everything, t-shirts and everything, but it's a huge word that makes all the difference in the world in your outlook, in your life, and your life after this. So I think choice is the big word for me that made it different for me. And choice leading to hope leading to joy, and living forward. I mean, it's just, it sounds simple, and it certainly isn't, and it's a lot of work, but you have to make a choice to do that, or you
I went skiing for the first time years ago. This was about 35 years ago, and the guy who took me skiing was kind of an expert. He could ski really well. And I spent the first day falling down at least 15, 20 times. They had to send the rescue people on the snowmobile to get me from the top of the mountain. I
miss that.
Yeah, I was throwing up everywhere. It was just miserable. And of course, my wife and I had 2 kids. Our 2 oldest kids went with us. They were like 7 and 5, and with another couple. And spent our whole life savings on this one ski trip. We had saved and scrimped. We didn't have much money, and I thought, I've just wasted all this money. And the next day we went back to the mountain again. And I even fell getting off the ski lift, and the chair behind me hit me in the back of the head. And I held up the whole line. People were voting to get Dave off the mountain, out of Colorado forever, to ban me. It was just terrible. And I'm laying in the snow on that second day of skiing. And it was Winter Park, Colorado, and they have a lot of handicapped skiers and a lot of family skiers. I'm not making this up. I saw a one-legged person ski past me as I'm laying in the snow. I saw about a 90-year-old woman ski past me. Okay. Then I saw a blind person ski past me. Then I saw a 90-year-old blind one-legged lady ski past me. Yeah, that's a joke there. The last one's a joke. But literally, I did see all these handicapped people ski, and little kids skiing past me. And I thought, do you know, if they can do it, I can do it. There's something powerful about an example of somebody living forward after horrific loss. And I think part of the problem is, we're going to talk about this in other podcasts, is, do I dishonor my loved one by being happy again? Many people think, I can't be happy again because maybe my loved one will be forgotten, or maybe I'm dishonoring them. If I really love them, I'll be sad. And we found that there's a lot of incompletes when people think like that. There could be guilt or resentments. And we're going to talk about all that in our podcast, because when I understand some of the fundamentals of grief recovery, I start to get a glimmer of hope. And so when I'm in the snow and I'm watching all these people, and they didn't have any more ability than I did. That's why example is so important. That's why we wanted you to be part of this podcast, uh, because you have suffered, you have been there, and the losses are real. So we're going to talk about that. One thing we want to on this initial podcast, we're going to give you the CPR of grief recovery. The CPR. Sometimes we just need a little nudge. We need somebody to restart our hearts again. And so we're using the acrostic CPR to describe something just very basic and fundamental to grief recovery, that if you grab hold of the concept, you can actually say, okay, I don't feel like recovering. I don't feel like living forward, but I know that if I start on the road to living forward, I can start having hope. I only need this much hope. That's all I need to get started. And then that's what this podcast is about. That's what Spark of Life is about. We believe in the power of the individual with the help of their God, or if whatever your God is, or whoever. We believe with the power of the individual to do things they cannot believe they can do. In other words, be happy after losing the dearest on earth to me. But it is a process. So what is the CPR? Okay, the CPR is context, permission, and restarting. And I'm going to repeat that. Rhonda, you repeat it with me. Context, permission, and restarting. Restarting. And context, you've already kind of mentioned this. We're just going to briefly, in the next couple of minutes, we're going to briefly go over what each of these three are, and then we're going to have a whole podcast on context, and then a whole podcast on permission to grieve, a whole podcast on permission to recover, and then the power of restarting. Because if you don't have the power of restarting, you're going to give up. And when give up lurks, I want you to think about CPR. When around the corner, give up is entering your mind, then we need to think through this thing. All right, context is important. And this, just mark this down if you're listening for the first time. Context. Every loss is in the context of other losses. You can even apply that to relationships. Every relationship is in the context of other relationships. So when I get married, and I married Debbie, I not only married all her baggage from the past, she married all my baggage from the past. Yeah, I didn't just marry Debbie Rich. I married a rich woman. I always wanted to, and I did. But we married the baggage. And what does that mean? It means that our life is in context of every other part of our life. So we have a woman come to a retreat. Her teenage son, her son was actually in his 20s, had taken his life by suicide about 6 months earlier. When we at the retreat, we do a loss story where you have to outline all your losses, and we teach you how to do that. But when she did that, she came back to me and said, my life is filled with loss. She thought she could not live forward because she thought she was a bad mother. That's why her son ended his life by suicide. So she felt guilt. She felt worthless because in her loss story, it came out that when she was a young girl, her stepfather had sexually abused her repeatedly. And so she had this guilt and shame, thinking she was so unworthy. And then she thought, and we're going to have podcasts on God and grief as well. She thought God was punishing her by sending all this bad stuff to her when it wasn't God at all, but it was people who, by their own free will, was hurting her with their free choice. And when she saw in context the loss of her son to suicide and all the other losses of her life, she realized it wasn't because she was a bad person. She felt so bad for her son, who really had some clinical depression going on. And so that's what we mean by context. And when she saw that, she started to get better. She still had pain. She still missed her son. She misses her son to this day. She still cries about her son leaving this world, but she's living forward because she started with hope. So what does context mean to you? You said earlier that this exercise was really important for you at the retreats, right?
Well, yes, because there were several things as a child that I had gone through, and a young I guess you would say teenager, actually. I got married right after my junior year of high school, so I was married real young. But there was just a whole slew of things on that timeline. In fact, even since I've been home, I've gone, wow, how could I have not put that major thing on my timeline? I mean,
Well,
and I'm like, how did I miss that? But you're so engulfed with the grief that you're going through at the time that you kind of, you've kind of blacked out other things. And so having the exercise and a little homework assignment like that to do as a group, and then you get in your small groups, and that's all great. And I'm not exactly sure how it's all done with online, but when you have these little exercises that you do, you don't even think to go there as an adult. You think, that happened. Okay, that's over. I got over that. And now I'm moving on. But the thing is, I realized I thought I was dealing with that. And I had gone to some counseling over some of those things. But some of those things that had happened, I just put on a shelf, never dealt with them. So then when I had a major loss, like my husband, losing him to cancer, boy, I was up to here or here, and didn't have the tools to deal with it. Once I got the tools, then I could start dealing with it.
right. And
And
so, yeah, so this context thing is real big. And we're going to talk in more detail about that in the next podcast. The P in the CPR is permission. And we've also made some reference to this, but permission is twofold. It's permission to grieve. One of the things we do at our retreats and our workshops and our online coaching and our online virtual retreats as well, we give people permission to grieve. It doesn't matter what your feelings are permitted. And here's the number one thing we see in the thousands of grievers we see that we've seen over the years. Many of the people that come to us think something's wrong with them. If only I was a better person, if only I was stronger, if only I was more faithful to my God, I wouldn't feel so bad. I would get through this quicker. We don't even like to use the phrase getting over a loss, because I hate that phrase, because you can't get over it as if it never happened. No, it happened. We like to use the phrase getting through the loss, working through the loss, giving yourself permission to experience pain. So when I give myself permission to grieve, I am actually helping myself. And so I love the wave illustration, Rhonda. I don't know if you remember the wave illustration. If a big old wave's coming at you and you try to fight against that wave, and you're going to brace yourself against that wave. And maybe I was looking at a video the other day of a 64-foot wave. 64-foot high wave. Can you imagine that? And if a wave's coming at you and you brace yourself and you face it, I'm going to beat this thing, what's going to happen? You're going to be hurt. You're going to be hurt really badly. And so we say, go with the wave. And when the waves of grief come, even years later, even months later after the loss, when the waves of grief come, go with it. Let the wave take you where it needs to take you. Give yourself permission to have a bad day or a bad week. And if you need to cry, you cry. And all that is found in permission. I don't know if that means anything to you.
It does, and I'll tell you why. I have several pieces of rental property that I manage. I have 3 children that were still, depend on me. 2 were still in college. I have new construction house to get. I had a lot of business to take care of.
Right.
So people are like always, "You're so strong. You're so strong." Hey, I don't want to be strong. I want to cry. I want to have a fit. I want to do everything that other people are allowed to do, and it was me not allowing me to do it. Yep. Because I had to be strong, and that's just bull.
It is bull. I guess we can say bull. I call it bull spit.
Okay. Well, I didn't say it. I just said bull. But
I call it spit.
We need your bride on here for all that. But anyway, the other thing is you made mention of now I just lost it.
The wave.
Yeah, but giving yourself permission and then faith. Man. You're talking about whooping my rear end. I was just whooping myself all the time. If I had more faith in God, why is this bothering me? I know where he's at. Why is this bothering me? It has absolutely nothing to do with your recovery and your permission and your all. Yep. It has absolutely nothing to do with your grief. Yep. In my opinion, you're the professional. But for me, it had nothing to do with my faith.
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with a weak faith. I feel
Okay.
like my faith is weak. Obviously, faith can carry us places we've never dreamed possible. But, and we're going to have a God and Grief podcast that we're going to talk about all those issues. But so many people say, if are told by their friends, if you just had more faith, you wouldn't feel so bad for so long. It's been a year, get over it. We've heard that so often, and that hurts people. That hurts people. There's no time frame on this. Give yourself permission to grieve. We're going to go deeper into that. And the other thing, we got to go real quick here, and we probably won't have time to discuss it. Permission to be happy again, permission to recover. Rhonda's already alluded to that about a choice. Permission to recover is a choice one makes, not an emotion one feels. Chalk that down, write it down, think through that. We're going to talk a whole podcast on this. Permission to recover means permission to be happy again, to be joyful again. And I don't always feel like it, but I get up and do the next right thing. And the last thing we're going to talk about today, just mentioning the R of CPR, is restarting. Restarting. All right. What was your New Year's resolution for 2020, Rhonda?
Well, my New Year's, I've never been a resolution person per se, but this year on January 1, I was like, all right, that's it. That's it. I'm going to get up and I'm going to be a big girl and I'm going to start moving forward. And my favorite of the CPR, you call it reframe and restart, but a word that you use a lot in our weekend was recovery. And
Yeah.
I loved that because within our society, whether it's a drug addict, alcoholic, whatever it is, we use the word recovery. And what I love about that word is that word implies that it's an ongoing process and it's okay. Recovery is okay. And so it almost goes back to the permission part.
Yes.
That it's a kind of, it twines in there together. That recovery it brought me a piece of, okay, you don't have to get over this. You don't have to move all the way through it. You just got to continue to recover from it.
Right.
And that gave me a sense of permission that it just brought me a peace. The second you and Debbie said it out of your mouths, I went, oh, okay. I just have to recover.
It is a powerful concept to help us get started.
Yes.
And then when we get started and we feel good for a while, then we can crash and we think we feel frustrated and we feel helpless and hopeless at times. We were doing so good and now a trigger happened and I fell back down. But that's what we mean by restarting. So I continually choose to restart. I just restart. My goal every year is to read the Bible every day, and I think I made it one year to January 10th before I failed. Okay, so I'm just that type of person. I'm scattered. I'm so scattered. And so what restarting means, if I didn't have a philosophy of restarting, I'd never read the Bible again. Well, I failed my resolution. I broke my promise. I was going to do this every day and I didn't do it. In grief recovery, I have to restart. Sometimes it's 9 years later. Sometimes it's next week. Sometimes, I restart. I restart again. At Spark of Life, there's always hope. We believe in hope. We believe you can climb out of that pit of grief with your pain, with precious memories of your loved one, with forgiveness in your heart, with forgiving the resentments and forgiving yourself. And we're going to talk about that in Living Forward Radio and our podcast. We're so happy you joined us on this first. Rhonda, thank you for the co-host, Rhonda Smith. And I'm Dave Matthews. And your co-host your host for Living Forward. Just a reminder there's always hope. Go to sparkoflife.org to find out when our next virtual retreat is. We'll have 15 to 20 people. We can see each other. We're going to do exactly the same things we do at our in-person retreats. We've had 106 of those. And online, you can go to our website and you can see testimonies of person after person who's experienced hope again after devastating loss with a Spark of Life 3-day retreat. Those are coming online August 20th, 23rd. You can sign up for one of those. We have online coaching. We want to walk with you through your grief walk. At Spark of Life, there is always, always hope.